Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
Gulabdas Broker, having been so closely associated with the freedom movement for a considerable time, why and how you gave up active participation later in your life?
In the jail, we were given writing materials. We were C-class prisoners and ordinarily they were not given, but representations were made even to Mahatma Gandhi and to the government, and Gandhiji intervened and he allowed writing materials to be given to prisoners who deserved them. So, some people got it. On one day, the writing materials were to be given. The rule was that one day in a week or a month, I don't remember now, the superintendent of the prison would come. He was a very nice man called General Bhandari, Colonel Bhandari. So all of us, the prisoners, would be standing in a line with our history tickets. Name, address, this, that, crime, punishment, days. We would be standing like this in a row. And then he would just pass. If anybody had anything to say, he should say when his eye was caught. If he had passed just, then you couldn't do anything about it. So I was waiting for my turn. As soon as he came, I said, "Sir, I want writing materials." He looked at me. I was just a boy of 20, 21, and he said, "You want writing materials? What do you want to write?" That was the question I had never asked myself. And so I didn't know what I was going to write. But I just managed to have a reply. I said, "Sir, I am a student and I am reading poetry, this, that. I am reading for my examinations that are to come. So I want to take notes for that." So the writing material was given to me. But then really I didn't know what to write. I read Lasky, took some points from him. I read Shakespeare, took some lines from him, and like that. But one day, as I told you, I was popular as an intelligent prisoner. So one day an elderly gentleman came to me and said to me, "Gulabdas, I have written some short stories and I want you to read them and give your opinion on them." I said, "Who am I to give an opinion? You are an elderly person. You have written, I don't know how to write a line of short story." Then he said, "You are talking very big every time, and now that I am requesting you to do something for me, you are not doing it." Then I said, "All right, I will read them." I read those stories. One full book of 300 to 400 pages, notebook, full of those stories. Very ordinary stuff. Some things that were good in them were from Ramnarayan Pathak and Dhumketu and Ramanlal Desai, but nothing of him was of any value. So I just managed to say, it is good in part, this, that and all that. But I said, why does this fellow write? Then another man like him came with the same request. And then I had become wiser. I accepted that. He also had the same things to do. Then I thought, if these people can write such nonsensical stuff, is it not in me to write some good stuff? Why should I not try? Why should I be taking these notes from Lasky and other people? Why should I not write myself? And then one day I had seen a prisoner who was with me. Very nice man, a Parsi. Very jolly fellow, as Parsis always are.
Yes.
But he was sitting very gloomy in a corner and all that. So when I passed near him, I just looked at him. I said, "Jamshed, what has happened? Why are you so upset and all that?" He had a letter in his hand. He handed it over to me. It was a letter from his wife. And his wife had said, "You are always going to jail. And you always tell me to go to this friend and that friend to get help from him because we are very poor. And I am ashamed every time to go to friends and ask
For their help.
favors from them. And so I had told you last time that if you again go to jail, I will go away from you. Now you have gone again, and so this is my last letter to you. Don't try to find me, and you are free to go to jail anytime you like. And so he was very unhappy, and I also felt the unhappiness in him. But then when I gave some good words to him, some advice, this and that, it was nothing. But when I went to my place, I thought and thought, whose fault was this? This fellow, he was just finding the freedom struggle within him. Should he not go to jail? He was a young man. When so many young people were sacrificing their lives, why should he not do it? Was he wrong? No. Then was this lady also wrong? Unhappy woman, managing a frugal Parsi family. And if every time she has to go to friends for help, would any self-respecting girl tolerate that? She was not also at fault. And this tragedy has happened. Who was at fault? That gave me the idea of a story. It was one of the first stories I made. And then I wrote stories in jail, one by one. But I was not like those two elderly gentlemen who wanted their work to be examined. I felt my work was worthless. Because I had before me the stories of Mopasa and Chekho and Dhumketu and Ramnaran and all those people. And I thought this stuff is all right just to pass the time in jail. So I would not show it to anybody. When somebody came, said, Gulabdas, what are you writing? I would just turn the pages and turn to those notes that I had taken. I had taken
from other books.
That I am taking this note. But like that, I began to write while in jail. I wrote 2 or 3 stories while in jail, and that is how my writing career began.
Many of the writers, when they are young, say when they are students, begin writing with poetry. Did this not happen in your case?
I had also begun to write poetry when I was in college, and I had contributed some pieces to the college magazine. Afterwards also, off and on, I wrote some poems. But after the story writing began, I thought that my medium was not verse, but the short story. And then it became less and less. I have published a book of poems.
Yes, Vasante.
But that is only one book against the 40 or odd books that I have written up to now. And so my interest in poetry gave place to the interest in the human drama that I could portray through the pages of a story or afterwards of a one-act play. That is how this thing took place.
You mentioned that you wrote a story about that Parsi co-prisoner.
Yes.
Has it been published?
Yes, it has been published. The title is 3 Letters. I have written that story in the form of letters. And there are 3 letters. One from the woman, and at last she comes back to him. That is the story. But she had also in actual life come back to him, because after we left the jail, we were lost to each other. Then recently, some 4 or 5 years back, I began writing my reminiscences in Mumbai Samachar.
Yes, your weekly column.
In a weekly column. In that weekly column, I had written an article about this Parsi gentleman, Jamshed Patel. So somebody who read that had sent that cutting to him. He was in America.
Oh.
He has migrated to America. So he sent that cutting to him. Then when he came from America to India, he just went to the Mumbai Samachar office, found my address, my telephone number and all that, and just telephoned, Gulabdas, sala olkhe ke mane. હું જમતું છું. And then he came here.
Acha.
He said, I have gone back. I said, what had happened to that girl of yours? He said, I have 3 sons. I said, then she came back. How could I get 3 sons if she had not come back?
Oh.
Just like that Parsi joke.
Mm-hmm.
So that ended very happily. And that story also ended happily. But that story is a longish story. But I generally write very simple things in a very simple language.
Yes, I know that.
This is a romantically written story because there was this element of the romance, how they came in touch with other, how they fell in love, how they married, after that this struggle, after that her running away, and after that her coming back. So the story is quite well written and quite well received also.
So let me get it straight. I mean, when you wrote that story,
Yeah.
You said, I mean, you showed in the story that the wife comes back to him.
Yeah.
But actually at that point of time you did not know.
No.
But many years later it turned out
Yes.
that
she
that
had
is what
come
exactly
back.
happened.
She had come back.
Mm-hmm.
That is,
I think that tells something about your...
you intuitively feel the human reaction.
Yeah, that tells something about your study of the human nature.
A study of the human nature.
Mm-hmm.
You intuitively feel that in certain circumstances, people do, because if there is love between the husband and the wife, and I knew about that from the conversation that I had with Jamshed, and then she was bound to come back.
Gulabdas bhai, if I am not mistaken, there is a time gap between you started writing and you started publishing.
Yeah.
For some years after you started writing, you did not publish. Why was that, and under what circumstances you started publishing?
I wrote in jail.
Mm-hmm.
Then I came back. Then I joined the Bombay Stock Exchange because it was my family business.
Yes.
And I was a good reader and I went on reading, but as I told you, I was feeling that what I could write was nothing, and compared to the other great people like Munshi and all those people, what would this come to? So I didn't start writing again. 2-3 years passed. I was staying in the fort area, then I shifted to Vileparle.
Was it this house or you were staying somewhere else? In
No,
Vileparle?
in this house only.
Oh.
1935 onwards, I am in this house.
Oh my goodness.
So here, I came in touch with the great Gujarati literary man Ram Narayan Pathak.
Mm-hmm.
One of my friends, Ratilal Chaya, he had written a poem and sent it for publication to Ram Narayan Pathak, as he was the editor of a very prestigious magazine called Prasar.
And he was in Porbandar and studying with
Ratilal
you.
Chaya was in Porbandar,
And
but
he was
his
studying with
poem
you,
was
yeah.
accepted.
Mm-hmm.
Accepted and not printed in the magazine.
Mm-hmm.
So once Ratilal Chaya came here and he said, these people, these Prasthan people, they have accepted my poem but they are not publishing it. I said, Ram Narayan is here and I know him, he is a personal friend, let us go to him.
Oh.
So we went there, both of us, like Cohen and Kelly, in a fighting mood. Said, Ram Narayan Bhai, you promise a person to publish a poem and then you don't publish it. What is this sort of editorship? He just smiled and said, let me see. So he saw the poem. Then he said, he analyzed the poem and showed me all the faults, in spite of the very beautiful language and the imagery and all that, why he would not publish it. Because there were these faults. Then I said, why did you accept it? He said, I was ill and somebody else was looking after the paper, he must have accepted it. But since we have accepted it on behalf of Prasthan, I will print it. and he printed.
Oh.
But I was so much impressed by his analysis of the poem that I remembered that I had also written something while I was in jail, and when such a fine man is there, such a knowledgeable man, why not show it to him? So the next day when Ratilal Chaya was gone, I politely asked him, Ramnayan Bhai, I have also written something, I would like to bring it over. And then I wrote a few lines, 4 or 5 lines. And next day I ran again to him. Would this do? He was very happy. Excellent, he said. Then he put the story again aside. I said, then can we offer it to somebody for publication? Because I never thought he would publish it in his magazine, because it's a very prestigious magazine and only the first-rate people would dare to go to. Even a Meghani or a Ramanlal Desai were afraid that he may not print that stuff. That's what they told me afterwards when I became their friend. So I said, can we send it for publication anywhere? So he just showed me the manuscript over which he had written in his own hand, Levu, to be taken. And just put a circle around it. I said, but would it be printed in Prasar? He said, do I edit any other paper? And so I was launched. The literary career began with the publication of that story in this magazine.
What was that story?
That was Juna Sanskar.
Oh.
The old Sanskaras.
Gulabdas Bhai, so Juna Sanskar was your first story to be published in Prasthan, which was the most prestigious literary magazine of the day in Gujarati. And how was it received by the readers and the critics?
See, I think the readers liked it well, because one day, early in the morning, as I was sitting in my house here, Ramnarayan Pathak came with a big bundle under his shoulder and just came smiling, threw the bundle on the table beside my coach and said, here is your story. And then I just opened it. It was reprinted from Prasthan in a magazine section of Pratap, a prestigious paper from Surat. And he said they have taken it from Prasthan, so that means that the story has gone to the public. And from then on, I received invitations also from other people to write stories from then, and so I think it had a good reception.
So that is how you entered literature.
Yes.
But I'm sure your association with Ramnarayan Pathak continued for many more years later on. So could you tell us something about your long association with Pathak Sahib, as all of us used to call him?
Pathak Sahib, till he died, was a very great elderly friend to me. He was just like an elder brother, like a father, say. He was a father figure to me, and he was one of the most genuine, fine gentlemen that I have met. And his sense of the appreciation of a thing of beauty in literature was so great that Umashankar Joshi, who had also one of the finest intelligences one meets in life, he once told me he was also as much in love with Ramnarayan Pathak as myself. And he said, Gulabdas, this Ramnarayan Bhai has the eye to find out a small needle out of a big, huge lump of dry grass. So that was it. And that is what at first attracted me to him, as I told you when he was analyzing the poem by my friend Ratilal Shah, I could see the sharpness of the intelligence that went into the appreciation or depreciation of poem that he was making. Apart from that, he was himself a very great short story writer, and we in those days knew and respected only two short story writers before us, and that was one was Dhumketu, the great romantic writer of stories, and another was Ramnarayan Pathak, the great realistic writer of short stories. So these names always went together in those days whenever when we were discussing stories, as the names of Umashankar and Sundaram in those days went as poets together, like that for stories Dhumketu and Ramnarayan, Dhumketu and Pathak, they went together. And apart from that, he was a very fine poet also. He has written very few poems, but those are excellent pieces of our poetic literature. And as a man, I can talk for hours about him, but I have in my long life met many friends and many intelligent people, many intellectuals, some of the highest order. But Ramnarayan was a man apart, and with his gentleness, with his sense of form, he would not hurt even a fly. And that is how I was very much attracted to him. As I was a businessman, you must be knowing that those people who are dealing with bullion, with gold, they go to there is a kata, there is a balance.
Dharam no kanto.
Dharam no kanto.
Yeah.
So they go there to get their gold or some bullion tested. So whenever I wrote a story in those first years when I was in Bombay, the moment I wrote a story, I would rush to him and read that story. When he said yes, then I would be satisfied. If he said no, then I would think and change and make it acceptable by him.
When you started writing short stories, did you make a deliberate attempt to break away from the tradition or to write differently from your elderly contemporaries, like you mentioned Ramnarayan Pathak and Dhumketu? In other words, did you have Sohrab Rostami with your elder generation?
No. I think, as I said, I was very diffident about writing stories. And in my days, the two names that counted for much in prose literature, Munshi was there as a novelist. Dhumketu was there as a writer of romantic, beautiful prose. Meghani was there, and he was full of the romance of life and the romance of language.
And the folk element.
Spoken and so, when I began to write, I thought I would not be able to write as they do. And I, on account of my study of literature under such great teachers, had found that one should be genuine to one's own experience and one's own inner creative self. So I didn't want to imitate them. I came from a small town in Saurashtra, and I belonged to a communities of Jainas, the Baniyas of it. We had not very beautiful women. And Munshi or Dhumketu, when they wrote about women, just we would dream about them, but we wouldn't see them on the street. And I thought when I began to write, that when I have not seen such beautiful women, why should I write about them? I should write about the persons that I know. So when I wanted to write about a very beautiful woman, in one of my early stories, I didn't fly into high words like Munshi or Meghani or Dhumketu. I just said the doctor had not seen fairies in his life. But when he saw this Sasikala, he thought that fairies may not be more beautiful than her. That is the only thing I permitted myself. And they would bring very romantic, high-strung characters. I knew only very ordinary people and very ordinary aspects of life. But I could see the extraordinary lying behind that ordinary.
Yes.
So I wrote the ordinary, trying to bring out the extraordinary out of it. And that way I wrote some of the early stories. And when my first book was printed,
What was that?
in 1938,
What was the title?
Ane Biji Vato. When that book was printed, Meghani, the romanticist, I was just on tenterhooks to read what Meghani had written because I knew that it would not appeal to him. It was entirely on a different level from what he and the others of his ilk were writing. But it was a rave review. And he was full of praise and all that. And he praised it to the skies. In making me a known writer in Gujarati, Meghani's contribution is very great. And I wondered why he went into all these things. Because I would not have much dialogue in my stories. Not very romantic episodes. Just ordinary people doing ordinary things, talking in an ordinary language. So one day when I became a little more known and when I became very friendly with the elderly B.K. Thakur, we called him Balu Kaka. And I was sitting with him and we were discussing things. And I asked him, Balu Kaka, I can understand many things, but I could not understand why Meghani was so much full of praise and he flew into such heights writing about my stories. Then he said a very, very poignant and a very pointed thing that has remained with me since then. He said, Gulabdas, look here. When you write creative literature, you try to do something. Meghani could do it in his particular manner. You did it in your particular manner. Meghani had the honesty to see that the same thing was done, but in a way in which he could not do it. I said in his way I could not do it. That doesn't matter because he is an honest man, because he thought he would not bring this result out of these ordinary things. He went into a flight. And that is how things happen.
Was there any adverse reaction or severe criticism when you started writing in this different way?
Not many, but the friends of our childhood, you see, they naturally knew us since we were very young. And they would not have detected that this man would be a writer and a man like Meghani or Balwant Rai Thakur or Ramnayan Pathak would be friendly with him. So they made some criticism. Gulabdas is a well-to-do man and this and that and all that. Some of them only. But most of the early things that I wrote, there was not much criticism, but by and large, there were good reviews and good people and most of the very good editors, they asked my stories.
Juna Sanskar was your first short story to be published.
Yes.
But I think the story that made you very well known as a short story writer was Lata Shumbole.
Yes.
And to an extent, it also became a controversial story.
Yes.
Could you tell us something about that story?
It is all fiction, but it caught the imagination of the people because in those days people were not writing like this. And all glory to Ramnarayan Pathak that he published it, because the other people who were editors said we would not have published this story because it dealt with adultery.
So that was the
Yes.
controversy about it.
Yes, that was the controversy about it. Now people were writing much bigger things about this whole thing. But then it was 1938 and the social condition was that. But that, as you said, gave me a lot of publicity and a lot of fame. Even now today when people are talking about me, the first thing they mention about me is Lata Subodh.
Yeah.
And so I gathered courage after that. And I said, if we tackle subjects which have to deal with the human mind and the human soul, and even if there is something controversial like this, we are so far advanced because we had read D.H. Lawrence and we had read so many European writers. It does not matter. But even then, we could go only a little distance. And then in later years, people went on increasing the distance.
Gulabdas bhai, as a short story writer, what is your principal concern or your chief interest? In other words, when you write a short story, what is it that you are trying to communicate?
My main concern is with the human mind and the human personality. The predicament that I portray is mostly mental and psychological. Psychological, when we say it, is not in the sense that we talk about psychology scientifically, but how the mind reacts, how the human soul reacts, even to an ordinary thing, how the circles go on in a human being's heart and how it molds his character and his action. I am interested in seeing that. And I am not interested in seeing that in a melodramatic way in which the dramatists would see them and portray them, but in a simple way on the outside. The outer cover would be so simple that things would be happening. But inside things would be changing. Relations would be changing, the whole outlook of the person towards the other person would be changing, and I am interested in portraying that through the short story mainly. Then there are social questions, this and that, but my main interest in writing a story is just to see the inner workings of the human mind and the human soul, how it reacts to things it likes or dislikes or is indifferent to.
During the early days of your literary career, we had a strong movement of progressive writers, and some of these writers were your close friends like Bakulesh, Jayant Khatri, Jitubhai Mehta, or even you mentioned Balraj Sahani. Still, progressive movement as such does not seem to have attracted you as a writer. How is that?
Yes, because the progressive, I was a very great friend of all these people.
Yeah.
Bhogilal Gandhi was one of the leaders then about the progressive movement. He was also a close friend, and all these people in Gujarati, as you mentioned, Balrajji, Balraj Sahni, Khwaja Ahmad Abbas, they were also my friends. But most of them were politically inclined, and they believed that the progressive writing progressively was the only thing that a writer should do, and so their eye would be going only to that aspect of life. I, as a writer, knew that life had many aspects, and this progressive writing was one of the aspects of life. And a writer should treat life as life, not as either progressive or retrogressive. Because these things change, but life goes on. And if you see at all the great works of the greatest writers of the world, they have portrayed only life. Even if it is a Mahabharata or a Ramayana or an Iliad or something, life is portrayed. And life is the most important thing. And life is such a thing, you just think you have grasped it and if it goes out of your hand. So whatever little you have grasped, if you can put it into words and if it remains with the people, it is worth portraying. That is why, but you will be surprised to know that in Gujarati, about 2 volumes have been published about progressive writing. They called it Pragati and Sahitya. Pragati and Sahitya. I am on the editorial board of the 2nd volume with Motilal Gandhi and 2 or 3 others. But my concern was with the human being, the human predicament, the human destiny and the human situation as such. And that is how I differed from all these friends so far as writing was concerned. I may have written things which may be progressive, but that was not my aim. And I didn't believe that that was the be-all and end-all of a literary effort.
Who are the writers, either Indian or others, that have influenced you most as a short story writer?
I think as a short story writer, I wouldn't lay my finger on any one writer and say that he has influenced me most. But I have liked some writers very much. In my early days, Chekhov was one such writer. I was a great reader of Maupassant, but Chekhov I loved. After that, Hemingway is still with me. After Hemingway, writers have come, Salinger and all those people are there. And I have been reading what even the newest writer is doing. But these people had the greatest charm for me, attraction for me. Among foreign writers, Mom I very much liked. I very much read. But I would not write as Mom did, but it was a formula writing. And so formula writing I somehow or the other have never liked. But we read all, but I would say Chekhov, Hemingway, Salinger in the early Saroyan, all these people had a great attraction for me among the foreign writers. And surprisingly, I liked Rabindranath Tagore as a short story writer very much. He was a very great short story writer. And once there was a talk, a lecture about Rabindranath's short stories, and I was invited to speak among other speakers. And there was one very great biographer of Rabindranath. I think it was Prometheus Basu or somebody like of that name. He presided. And when I talked about Rabindranath's stories, in his remarks he said, I would consider Rabindranath as great or perhaps a greater short story writer than a poet. So, Rabindranath's stories I liked very much. Among the Indian writers, Jainendra's stories I liked. Jainendra was a person I very much respected as a writer. Later, Agyeya came, and among the Gujarati writers there were very few people with us. Ramnara and Dhumketu were the early influences. And then the others, we were just of the same age and class and group or whatever you may like to call it. So these things have not influenced but very much attracted me. And you will find among my stories that you could not place it as a Hemingway story or as a Saroyan story or as a Pathak story. I make them in my own way.
Is it a deliberate effort or it is
No,
just
no,
natural?
because as I said, I had tried to portray life as I had seen it, without all those beautiful women intervening in it, without all those great characters like Munjal or Mridal Devi intervening. So, in my own way, whatever I had seen and whatever I had felt, the only thing was I had seen behind the apparent, the real behind the virtual. So, that was there. And so I wouldn't say that I wanted to write independently of all, because I never thought that I was above anybody. Even now I do not think that I am above anybody. We are all the children of Saraswati.
Gulabdas Bhai, some years ago, it was quite fashionable for critics to say that in your short stories, you chiefly deal with man-woman relationship, and that too very often outside the bond of marriage. Would you like to say something on this criticism of your stories?
That was the criticism leveled against me. And so far as the facts were concerned, it was true also. When I wrote a story like Lata Su Bole, it was a story of a man-woman relationship outside marriage. Like that, I had written some stories outside marriage also, where the relationship took place. But what they missed was that I was not talking about that relationship. I was talking about the human being, how it acts in certain circumstances and how it reacts. So, they just to malign or perhaps just not seeing the whole thing through, they just made this accusation. But Deepak Bhai, you must have read most of my stories, and having read them, a majority of them, you will naturally find that I have written as many stories about man-women relationships as I have written about children. I have written about mother. So, the scope is there very large, but when you try to pinpoint, when you try to blame Munshi, you would say he is a romanticist. When you try to blame Ramanlal, you would say he is a simple writer of Gandhian days. But things are not happening like that, and the critics should go deeper into man-woman relationship. Since the world was created, men and women are created. Since the world was created, there are problems between men and women and the society behind it. So, it does not matter if you try to look at the depths of the human soul that is coming out of this relationship between men and women. That is what I tried to do, and that is what I am still doing. If it is possible, if that sort of a thing strikes me, I would be writing like that.
You just referred to it, and I have also noticed, Gulabdas Bhai, that in a large number of your short stories, the mother figure comes out very strongly. Is it because of your deep attachment to your mother?
Yes, I think my attachment to my mother was very great. Because when I was about 9 years old, my father died. And then I grew up with my mother. I had a brother, but he was doing business in Bombay and we were in Porbandar. So I lived with my mother. And through my mother, I came to know many women of her age group. And I was attracted to all of them, so much so that now that I am 80, and if I meet a woman of 65, say, with white hair and all that, I would call her Ma, because I would think she is my mother. That thing has Then she would say, oh, but Gulabdas bhai, I am younger to you. And then I said, but I am reminded of my mother when I see you. So that is how things go on. So the mother figure, not in the psychological or the Freudian sense,
Yeah.
but in the sense of ordinary, the attachment between a child and the mother. The first book I published, I dedicated to my mother with this line. She had died by then.
Oh.
Chahun janmo janme shishu tujhu ne mat mujh tu. I would like in every birth to be your child. I would like to be a child and my mother you should be. That is how I felt towards her, and she was a unique and a great person in her own ways. Though she was not educated, in writing about her and her group of ladies, I have said these ladies could have managed a kingdom. And from that I have come to the conclusion that those who are not educated are not unknowing.
They are not.
Abhan etle agnan nahi. That is what I have come to. And if you look at many people, Ravi Shankar Maharaj, Kamaraj, they were not educated, but how great they were. And we don't know about Buddha and Mahavir and all that, but they influenced the whole world. So that is how the mother figure is prominent, and you will see that many writers, Uma Shankar for instance, when he was writing about older ladies in his plays and everything, shrewd, cunning, badmash. In my writings, you will never feel an older lady like that.
Yeah.
They are all kind, compassionate, mother-like. So that is how things have happened with me.
Many of your short stories also deal with a child's life.
Yes.
How is that?
Because I have children and I have enjoyed being with children, and I have found they are also in their own way very intelligent, very cunning and very lovable. Look at their eyes when they demand something from you. Look at the way they smuggle into you and ask for daddy, can I get this thing and all that. So I have always liked children. I don't play much with them.
Yes,
but
I noticed that.
I watch them and they have given me very great things to write about. Always.